Ladies and gentlemen, we have a fellas, we have a new wide receiver this year. He has cracked the top 5 in my wide receiver rankings in any wide receiver format, PPR, non-PPR, whatever you want to talk about, but also, he's in the top 4. And if you wanted to get, not crazy, but if you wanted to get a little frisky, a little bit of frisky, touchy-feely, put him at number 3, I wouldn't say you were too crazy. And that man's name is going to be one, Calvin Ridley. Top 5 wide receiver Calvin Ridley. And the writing's on the wall now for Calvin Ridley that Julio Jones is out of this team. He's out of Atlanta. He told Shannon Sharpe, I'm out of there. Heading over to Tennessee, to Nashville. I'd definitely rather live in Nashville than Atlanta, personally. So that's where you have to start with Julio Jones gone, of course, and what this is going to mean for the target share, the overall volume, the whole offense, and what exactly Calvin Ridley is in for. So Julio Jones is gone now, right? And he's dealt with these injuries for years now, but he doesn't usually miss games. Like, he missed 2 games last year, and that was the most he's missed in a very long time. 51 receptions, over 750 yards, and 3 touchdowns. 7.6 targets per game. So a lot of targets to go around, and exactly 20% target share, and a 22% red zone target share. Earlier in the year last year, Julio had a double touchdown game. That means 2 touchdowns in one game. Double your TDs in that one. And then, as always with Julio, it doesn't seem to go above 5 or 6 touchdowns, but Julio Jones is now out of there, and I could pop up on the screen right now what happens to Calvin Ridley in his career when Julio Jones has not played. Now, it's not just last year. We've seen the year before that. We've seen since Calvin Ridley has taken over on this offense right away as a rookie, scoring loads of touchdowns out of the slot, then moving to the outside for Atlanta since that rookie season. He has played 8 games when Julio Jones is not out there. And as you can see the splits from RotoViz on the screen right now, 36 games with Julio, 8 without him, and the 36 with him, 14.7 fantasy points per game, and 20.1 fantasy points per game without Julio. Now, obviously, if you look at what happened last year, Calvin Ridley, it'll be a little bit higher, but let's take the bigger sample of 8 games. Let's not just talk about what happened specifically last year. I mean, it is a similar offense in terms of the quarterback play that's going to be there and some other players on this team. New offensive coordinator, Arthur Smith, coming from the team that Julio was going to. So we missed the boat on that one, getting to see those guys together. So that will add a little bit of a wrinkle, but as you can see, almost 3 receptions more per game, a whopping 46 more yards per game, and he goes from pacing for 6 touchdowns in a season to 10. Calvin Ridley is locked in right now as my wide receiver 4. The only guys ahead of him are Devontae Adams, which can change if something happens in terms of Aaron Rodgers leaving there, which I'm not expecting. But if it did, we would bump him down. Number 2, Tyreek Hill. Number 3, Stephon Diggs. I have right now Calvin Ridley slightly ahead of DeAndre Hopkins. So that's what's Julio gone. And you already had Calvin Ridley coming out of a massive year last year alone, right? Calvin Ridley continues to have fantastic seasons. He was averaging close to 24 fantasy points per game last year when Julio missed games and left some games early as well. And Ridley played 83% of the snaps, missed a game himself, but went for almost 1,400 yards on 90 receptions, and he had 9 touchdowns on a whopping 143 targets, in which he ranked in all those categories, basically top 10. He ranked 11th in receptions, but he ranked 7th in targets and 4 in overall yards. And his quarterback, Matt Ryan, was throwing a heck of a lot. I mean, last year, Calvin Ridley led the NFL in air yards and deep targets of 20 or more targets he had last year, leading the NFL with 40 deep targets. He was 4th in fantasy points per game. So last year alone, fantasy points per game, he finished as wide receiver 4, and now he's going to have a whole season without Julio. And Matt Ryan and in this offense, I expect him to throw again. I mean, their game environments, they're projected, depending on the sports book you look at, for over under 7 wins. They had a bottom third of the league defense last year, a bottom third of the league offensive line. That maybe gets better as it ages a little bit, right? We had a couple of rookies on the line last year. One got banged up. One just flat out stunk. 2 first-round picks that they had last year. Maybe it gets a little bit better with health and experience and some changes they've done in the offseason. They're drafting some more guards, drafting another center as they let Alex Mack go. But what I'm trying to say here is I still expect a bad defense, and Atlanta has really, over this Matt Ryan era since Calvin Ridley's been there, never had much of a great defense. So I still expect a bad defense there, meaning if they get behind in games and they have an adequate to, I would say, at least average quarterback, even with Julio not there, it gets worse. But Matt Ryan's still an average to an above average quarterback in the NFL right now is what I would say. That should lead to a lot of scoring environments, especially when you're going up against Carolina, going up against Tampa Bay. Those are some good defenses in Tampa Bay. Carolina, improvement last year after taking a ton of draft picks, and the Saints, quality defense, but good offenses as well, good quarterbacks. You should see some shootouts there, some high total games, some totals in the 50s quite often for the games that Atlanta's in, meaning points, meaning touchdowns, meaning yardage. And Calvin Ridley, the wide receiver 1 on that team, you're going to like that. If you have a wide receiver 1 in Ridley on a top 15 offense even, let alone top 10, it's going to look very good. Last year, Matt Ryan did lead the league in passing attempts. It wasn't just all over the field and downfield that Ridley was involved. He was number 2 in red zone targets. He was efficient. He was number 7 in yards per route run. So he was efficient. He had the volume. He kept that efficiency on the volume. He's not somebody who was known for separation heading into last year. He was able to get his route running ability up and start to separate a little bit more for somebody who did not come out as one of the fastest receivers when being drafted out of Alabama. But right now, Calvin Ridley looks like an alpha. But what is the rest of the competition going to be here? And what does that competition look like, at least in some sort of a sample, without Julio Jones on the field? And we can go right over to the first guy that we'll look at, and that's going to be a wide receiver. We won't go yet to Kyle Pitts, but we'll go to wide receiver Russell Gage. And Russell Gage has actually played in 8 games without Julio Jones, probably those same 8 without Calvin Ridley. So 27 games, you can see the splits on the screen right now. 27 games with Russell Gage in, and Julio in 8 games without Julio in there. And Russell Gage ends up seeing about 4.5 more fantasy points per game. You see 16 more yards per game. He ends up pacing for, instead of 1 touchdown, for 6 touchdowns. So obviously Russell Gage is going to take a knock up. But we can't just look at that. We can't just look at that because obviously this is going to be a new offensive coordinator. And of course, in the middle of the field, this tight end, great blocker, improved his final year at Florida, but also one of the best prospects, if not the best tight end prospect of all time already, Kyle Pitts. And Kyle Pitts gets bumped up without Julio here. He's right now my tight end number 4 behind just Kittle, Darren Waller, and Travis Kelce in that reverse order. And there's not much left to say out of Kyle Pitts since a lot of it got drained in the draft process. 4th overall pick, an odd pick now as you see Julio goes out. So it's not fully a rebuild right now, but it's definitely not a win now team. So why not take one of the quarterbacks there when those type of quarterbacks in a Justin Fields, even a Mac Jones, but a Justin Fields, the guy you would have taken there, probably not going to be available a year or 2 or 3 years from now. Maybe, but probably not. And will you have that luxury of a top 5 pick? That's an argument or a discussion, we should say, for another day. But Kyle Pitts coming out, right? 20 and a half years old, 6'5", 235 pounds. Moves like a motherfucking wide receiver. No drops last year. No drops on a whopping 67 targets, right? He ended up playing in 8 games. He sat out a game, 17.9 yards per reception, 14.5% target share. The guy was fantastic, right? 10 deep targets, ranked 1st in all of college football, even though he didn't play a lot of games. 331 deep yards of 20-plus yards down the field, and he's great after the catch. Everything's great for this guy. Contested catch artist. So he's going to be good, and he's going to get his, and you could probably see him go right now. The over-unders are 780, 870. It's a wide difference in the betting markets. Right now, Kyle Pitts looks like somebody who's going to be getting close to 950 yards at the current target share and volume that I have this offense passing for. So that's great, but that still doesn't knock Calvin Ridley for posting close to 1,400-yard seasons, 8 touchdown total type projections right now. Russell Gage, and the before-mentioned Russell Gage that we saw with some splits, you ended up having a nice year last year, and even the year before that, he started to break out later on in the season. 72 receptions. You can see the stats on the screen last year, an 18.2% target share, 20% red zone share. Expect that to get taken a good amount by Kyle Pitts. Almost 7 targets per game, though. I do believe there's an argument to say, you have Christian Blake on this team. There's a lot of depth on this team after that, and not good depth at all, right? You have Russell Gage, Kyle Pitts. You have the other tight end, Hayden Hurst. I expect some 2 tight end sets. You have one, Calvin Ridley, who we're talking about here, but after that, it's not much. Mike Davis, a running back. Okay, he'll get some receptions. It's nothing crazy. But then it's like Christian Blake and Olmedid Zaccheaus, who they've tried for a couple of years now. It isn't working out. Zaccheaus got some run last year, right? This is somebody who was undrafted out of Virginia, so maybe he's the first crack at it right now. What we're trying to say here is that those guys are not going to be anywhere near as productive and demand that production as the Gazelle, a Gazelle who is an absolute freak, right? A size and speed specimen in Julio Jones. So that 20% target share last year from Julio, which was only going down last year, 20% is not going to be taken up by Zaccheaus, by Christian Blake, by Tajay Sharp, and we can keep going down. The rookie Frank Darby, somebody they got last year in the draft, I believe, in Greg Dortch. These guys are not taking up any usage. It's just nobody. They're going to go more 2 tight end sets, I believe, there, or at least have these guys. They like 11 personnel, but they don't have the guys right now. Tajay Sharp is former Titan. Is he really going to do anything? I mean, Arthur Smith maybe thinks he looks okay from the time there, but I don't think we're going to see much competition here for Calvin Ridley, at least on the outside receiver, away from Kyle Pitts. So with that all said, it's ramping up really nicely here for Calvin Ridley this season, and the only other additions and subtractions, we'll pop them on the screen just so you have the full picture, trying to help you out there, is you can see the additions and subtractions on this team. Like, they added Mike Davis, of course. They added Cordell Patterson, but more of a running back, hasn't played wide receiver in a while outside of kick returns and like when really bad issues happened for the Bears in terms of their depth 2 years ago, 2.5 years ago, right? He's more of a running back. The Patriots kind of put that into his role. Not much else, though. Josh Andrews, a center. You can see what they did in the draft outside of Kyle Pitts. They got Frank Darby late. Don't think it'll be much of a factor early on. And then a couple of offensive linemen, a tackle and a center. Lost a lot of guards and bad players. Justin McCray, James Carpenter. They lost these guys. Alex Mack might be a decent loss, but they replaced him in the draft. We'll see how that goes. So what you're seeing here is not much. Not much at all outside of Kyle Pitts. Maybe some Mike Davis. Calvin Ridley's in line for a lot here. Almost 1,400 yards in my projections, over 8 touchdowns, 8 in like 0.3 touchdowns right now in my projections for somebody who's always demanded a high target share in the red zone since his rookie season. In PPR formats right now, for me, he's grading out as the wide receiver 4, and that can only get better depending on what happens with Aaron Rodgers in Green Bay. So Calvin Ridley is a top 5 wide receiver, but don't let the title fool you. He's a top 4 to top 3 wide receiver, and he's somebody that right now, where you can be getting him based on his current ADP, you should be taking advantage of in a major way. So Calvin Ridley, top 5 wide receiver. Thanks for tuning in, everybody. Best of luck today. And if you want any more information from me, check out the rest of the channel here. And also be sure to check out the free draft guide this year and how you can get that down below, thanks to the sponsors of this program and myself, Prize Picks. That free draft guide, 2021 fantasy football ranks, projections, key stats, a whole bunch of stuff, top 150s and tiers. A lot more than that. Check out that video down below. Peace out, gang.